Welcome to this week's episode of Insight. During this week's show, we're going to be covering a few topics. The first one is going to be the opening of the Iranian Consulate in Kapan. And the second one is going to be the latest Freedom House rankings about the internet freedom around the world. Then we're going to talk about the issue of political vision, or the lack of thereof in this country. And we're going to close with a small item from the Diaspora. First, I want to start with a correction. During last week's show, I said that the Armenian state had not asked for an international investigation of the murder of our POWs. That's actually not correct, and that was corrected by people who, one of our ambassadors actually. And the truth is that on September 19th, the Office of the Representative Republic of Armenia on International Legal Matters directly appealed to the International Court of Justice in regards to this matter as a continuation of the previous violations of human rights and abuse of prisoners under the International Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. So I wanted to put that on the record first. The first item that we're going to be discussing is the opening of the Iranian Consulate in the city of Kapan. And obviously, this is not about some massive request for Iranian visas in that area, or in Kapan, or in Syunik. This obviously is a political message to the regime in Baku. This was a very big event. It was attended by the foreign ministers of both countries. Again, this is, I think, part of the messaging, because generally foreign ministers do not show up at opening up of consulates. This was followed up by the Iranian foreign minister highlighting how Armenia needs to open up a consulate in the city of Tabriz in Iranian Azerbaijan, the original one. And this was agreed to by the Armenian foreign minister. This is obviously part of a greater Iranian messaging about Syunik. They've been very clear about how Syunik is important to Iran. This has also, frankly, been joined by multiple different countries, whether it's the US or EU, have multiple programs, some known, some unknown, in Syunik that are essentially making the same case to the Azeri regime. Let's move on to the second item of the week, which is the Freedom House survey on internet freedom. Now, let me explain what Freedom House is. Freedom House is an organization, it's a nonprofit that's set up by the US government to track freedom around the world. Obviously, it's on some level carrying out US foreign policy. We shouldn't be naive about that. In these rankings, which have very complicated formulas, Armenia got a very high score on internet freedom, which is at 74, only a few points lower than most Western countries. Now, some might think this is actually not that important, or is somewhat of a trivial issue, and anybody who says that is actually 100% wrong. Why it matters, if you look at the map, except because outside of a few anomalies out there, there's a direct correlation between internet freedom and freedom in general and prosperity. So that is something that is quite important to us as we're continuing to develop our economy and hopefully having a far more affluent country. It also works directly into our branding and messaging. And what is that? Which we're an island of freedom in a sea of tyranny. And if you look at that map, you can clearly see that. If you look at that map carefully, what you will see is there's a small island of Armenia and Georgia, and you essentially need to get all the way out to Japan to have countries that enjoy the internet freedoms that we do. There's obviously a direct connection between internet freedom and also democratic freedom. And something that struck out with me is they have a different ranking, which is about democratic development or freedom in general. And one thing that I noticed that our neighboring country, Aliyev's state, comes in with a score of 9, which is actually 1 point behind the Taliban-run Afghanistan, which sort of put things in perspective. And this is also a good message to our European and Western friends who think that people in Artsakh should go, and under any scenario, live under the Azeri regime. And this is a country that actually has less freedom than the Taliban-run Afghanistan. Now we're going to move on to this, what I call the issue of vision. Once a couple of weeks, we sort of try to talk and focus on topics that are much broader than the weekly ones, but sort of topics that actually bring us in a backward way to the weekly ones. And the first thing that I want to talk about is this issue of vision. This is something that is sort of a sense of who you are, where you want to go. And it is fair to say that our leadership over the past 31 years has never articulated a vision of what they want the country to be. What is Armenia supposed to be? What are you trying to build? I'm frankly not interested in going over the failings of each of the four people that have run this country over the past 31 years. That's not particularly helpful. It's a waste of energy. However, I think it would be fair to say that for the most part, they didn't have a vision of what kind of a country that they wanted to build. And if they had it, they actually never articulated it. You know, there's a very famous quote in the Bible where it says, without a vision, the people perish. And that's actually very true. Without a vision, without something that you're working towards, what you get is people that get blown off in different directions by this person saying this person saying that. They're not really grounded in reality. You become essentially what we are today, which is a leaderless people, a rudderless people that can be confused by an army of politically motivated media figures and self-appointed experts. Now let's talk about what our vision should be. And we've sort of discussed this before, and I think our vision should be this, is what I call the three nevers, which is the lessons of the 2020 war and everything that's come after that. We should never be poor again, we should never be politically isolated again, and we should never be weak again militarily. And all of this in the context of preserving the freedoms that we have in this country, even though they're certainly not perfect and they need to be improved, but that should be our vision. Now, people should be able to, in our political discourse, disagree about how we actually achieve these goals, as long as these are our primary goals. Now, sitting back, thinking about this, I try to sort of comprehend why we've never really articulated a vision, or why any of our leaders never articulated a vision of where they want to take this country, and or they've never really expressed it in a way that anyone could understand it. And I think if you really think about it and you sort of examine it, you get the sense that what is at the heart of this matter, this lack of vision, is that they never felt a need to explain themselves, that things happen. I make decisions, and I'm not in any way accountable to my constituents or people who have elected me, and I never have to answer to them. I think at the heart of this thinking, where they're coming from, is for the most part for our leadership in this country, and to a great extent even today. Democratic thinking is really an abstraction. It's not the principal operating procedure. It's not what people live by, and it's not something that we organized our state around. It's just a concept that's out there, but in real terms, the accountability is not there. Because ultimately, any vision is actually tied to accountability. And if our leaders do not have vision, which is, by the way, not uncommon around the world, most leaders around the world tend to be mediocrities, it is the job of the citizenry to actually demand accountability and line up lines of responsibility and expectations, something that our political class has never been subjected to for the past 31 years. It is about time to change that. The last item that we're going to be focused on is actually news from the Diaspora. And this is from the city of Los Angeles, which is one of the centers of the Armenian Diaspora. And it involves actually a political scandal, which involved multiple political leaders being caught on tape, saying very vicious, racist things about multiple groups of people, whether they were black, whether they were different people from Mexico, or they were Jews, or they were Armenians. And this has sort of led to a massive political crisis in that city, and has led to multiple resignations or demands for resignations.
I stand with these people that do see how serious that racism is.
Now, how is this related to Armenia? That's because one of the ways that they are trying to solve this issue is to elect an Armenian council member, his name is Paul Kakorian, to actually become the council president, and last week became the council president, which is the second most important person in that political system in the city of Los Angeles. And what do we have here? It's something very interesting, that in the second most important city, or the biggest city in the most important country in the world, in a moment of crisis, the political leadership in that city reaches out to one of the sons of this nation to bring it back together and get it out of this moment of crisis. In conclusion, I want to close with two things. The first thing is, so much of the news that we actually get from the diaspora tends to be rather negative. We have our obviously criminal elements abroad who actually constantly do things to embarrass us here or there. So this is a proud moment. This is something that's entirely different, and this is something that we should all be proud of and note. But I think the more critical lesson here, and this is very much related to Armenia, is this is a lesson that we need to learn. I don't want to hear anyone tell us that we don't have the ability to create competent or good political leaders. In fact, we have a history of doing so around the world, from French prime ministers to high Soviet officials to governors of California. So we're actually capable of producing political leaders, and in rare occasions we've done so here. What we need to focus on is to bring those abilities home and to create leaders that we can all be proud of. Thank you for joining me in this week's episode of Insights.
And that's why LA is my lady. LA is my lady. And you're looking at a man who doesn't have a plan to kiss his lady bye-bye.